I offer readings and healings. In the readings, there are 4 different types of reading I do: palmistry, cards, clairvoyance, and I can read photographs. And my healing I developed myself in the late 80s and in the 90s, and it's grown as well since then, which is, most of it is based on releasing people's jammed emotions so they can get on with their lives. And for that I use a certain amount of visualization, and I also use sound. Usually the client making a sound, but sometimes I make the sound. And that is, that's a very enjoyable part of my work, because people whose lives are stuck become unstuck and think they're wanting to get into their lives completely change.
Let's just think about this. So for example, I'm searching for somebody like yourself. There's a huge range out of there. I think the important things for me would be sort of experience, who the person is. How does this work? Tell me a little bit about your experience and how you got into this.
Right. Well, after I'd moved into this flat many years ago, and I had no money because the mortgage was very high, there was an American healer called Martin Brofman, who's actually now dead, and later he moved to Denmark, so he's known to belong to Denmark, but he did start life in America. He came over here, and you paid £50 to register for a weekend course, and then you paid whatever you liked at the end. And most of my friends didn't want to do that because they felt they were going to have a hard sell at the end. But as I'd been used to travelling around India, where everybody is constantly begging off you, that I wasn't affected by people trying to make me part with money. I'd learned how not to. And so I paid the £50. I did the course, and that was how my healing journey started, being able to heal others. And then sometime later after that, I read this book called Toning, by an American lady whose name I can't remember at the moment, and it was to do with getting your physical health better, and you had to do it standing up, and you had to imagine that your hips were car headlights. Well, I did this once, and I thought, damn this, I'm not into thinking about my hips being. I did it sitting down, and I soon found that it was a sort of, you felt much better after you'd done some toning. And then I had a friend who was very worried about, she had a man she had her mind on, and he wasn't particularly interested in her, and she had all sorts of problems, and could I help? So I suggested that she came round and we tried the toning. So we were both doing it together. I think we were both doing it together, sitting down, forgetting the car headlights bit of our hips, and I had a most awful coughing fit in it. So much so that I had to stop her ringing 999. She thought I needed rescuing. And I said, no, I was fine. Well, by the end of it, the man she knew apparently had had bronchitis ever since she had known him. The next time she saw him, he was cough-free. He would be totally... That coughing fit I had somehow totally cured him. It had also changed his mind towards her, so... And they were together for, I think, 20 years or something after that.
Well, this is the thing. You're 74, yeah?
Yes.
And it feels like you're a very magical person. This is a very magical place in a very, very wealthy part of London. But your journey, really, your history, your story is quite remarkable. And I know, if you could tell me a little bit about your childhood. I know you had a difficult childhood at times, if you feel comfortable. And also, the issue with your hair, the sort of your background, really, what happened to you in your life, because I think that's really important for people to get to understand who you are.
Right, well, I lived as a small child in what was Berkshire and is now called Oxfordshire, near Wantage. My father had fought in both world wars and had started as a normal soldier in the beginning and had landed up as a brigadier at the end. He died when I was just past my 6th birthday. Life was good up to that point. Then my mother got terribly upset and cried for a year. And I remember being incredibly lonely. We did have, also living in the house, there was Nanny, who had been nanny to my 4 older sisters, all of whom were adult when I was born, and she had turned into cook. And she spent most of that year sort of with my mother, trying to stop her crying. And then there was Mabel, who was our housekeeper, and she lived with us as well. So there had been 4 adults in my life, and then my sisters when they happened to pop in. And then after my father died, there were just 3 women that as such brought me up between them. And I remember being so bored, waiting for meals and things. I used to swing. I had to swing, and I would swing back and forth. If I was outside. If I was inside, I would rock on the rocking horse instead. And I started to play with the rocking horse's hair when I was on the rocking horse, and pull its hairs out of its mane. And then I remember one of my sisters discovering it and saying to me, "Oh, who's been pulling out these horses' hairs? It couldn't have been you, could it?" And, oh no, it must have been one of Janet's children, who was one of my sisters. And I didn't say anything, but I knew it was me. I mean, obviously I knew it was me, but I sort of had a feeling she probably knew it was me as well. It was sort of a way of not telling me off, but telling me off, if you see what I mean. And then just before we moved house, my mother got rid of the rocking horse because she decided that, well, it hadn't been our rocking horse. She had borrowed the rocking horse for me, and it had to go back to whoever it was we borrowed it off. And on the morning that it was leaving, Nanny said to me, "Would you like to say goodbye to the rocking horse?" And I said, "Oh, I'll say goodbye later." And I didn't realise when she was packing it up that when I went later to say goodbye to it, it was just one huge brown paper parcel, completely unhorse-shaped. I was furious and started to scream and stamped out the house. My mother was following me, yelling at me to shut up. And I went and sat amongst my fir trees in the garden. I consider them to be my trees. And I wasn't allowed to cry, so I had to hide the emotion in, at least not cry noisily. And so I fiddled with my own hair instead. And I made a reef knot, or probably not a reef knot, but a knot in my hair. And then later that afternoon, I had to go and say goodbye to the neighbours who had allowed me to watch Andy Pandy every Tuesday afternoon on their television. Though I preferred Bill and Ben, the flower pot men, who were on Wednesdays. But no, I'd been invited for Tuesdays, and I was very lucky I was allowed to go on a Wednesday. So I went around to say goodbye to them, and there was a mother and daughter as in both adults. They found this knot in my hair and tried to undo it and couldn't, and kept asking me how it got in there, and I kept numb. I knew that if I told them the truth, it was probably going to get told off, so I said nothing.
And then your childhood, your mum was how old when she had you?
She was 46 when I was born.
So
and my father was 60.
So coming to your life experience, what got you to where you are now, this sort of spiritual path? So if you could continue the story.
Well, we moved to a house in Chattleworth House, that was owned by one of my, well, he wasn't my brother-in-law at that point, but he became my brother-in-law, his mother. It was a huge house. It had something like 96 rooms. I once had to count them for school. And I think I counted the barns as well, but I think it came to 90. Oh, maybe it's a slight exaggeration. I think it might have been 54, actually, but it was huge. And it was there that I had this horrible bedroom that had no light. It was faced north. And on the first day of getting there, my mother wouldn't let me help unpack. Well, by this time I was 7. And I had to lie in the bedroom with a new book. And I always had difficulty starting new books, and my mother wouldn't help me start it. And so I remembered making the hair knot, and I continued to make. So I had a hair problem that started from that moment.
So that explains when you got older, you had this issue where you pulled out your hair. Explain that condition.
Well, it's called Trichotillomania. I found that out in my mid-40s. I'd been doing it for 35 years, or more than 35 years, thinking I was the only person in the world that did it. Until one of my nephews actually sent me a cutting from the paper showing me that other people did it too. And through that I contacted some of them, and I joined a charity or two connected to it.
So that also, there was a very difficult, so you had a very difficult childhood, loneliness and boredom. You said that you really reached rock bottom, I think. When you
I did reach rock bottom, and I nearly killed myself when I was 7. I wanted to hang myself on the end of the banisters. I was so unhappy because my mother was always cross with me. And in the beginning, after my father died, she was cross because there were things that he had that I loved. Like there was a prism that you could look through and see rainbows. And there was an ink pot that had 6 sides. And every time I wanted something, my mother told me off for being selfish. And that all my father's things started to vanish as they were given to my sisters. So I spent that year with a crying mother and her giving away everything I loved. And then later, when she discovered, finally, with the hair, I dropped all these knots I made down the side of the bed, and I was always going to remove them, but I didn't get around to doing it. And then Mabel was doing the housework one day and found the pile of hair under the bed and called Nanny. And Nanny went and told my mother, and my mother demanded my presence in her bedroom, where I had to stand there and look her in the eyes, and because that was the way her theory was, you couldn't lie if you were looking in her eyes, and to tell her where it came from. So I told her, and she was very, very angry. And she was so angry that I went back to my bedroom, laid on my bed and pulled some more hair out to calm myself down. And then she found out about it again later. She was even more angry the second time, so I dealt with the situation so she couldn't find it by swallowing it.
Gosh, and carry on. But what kind of
yes? How do we get to
really,
yes? Yes. Well,
what happened to? So it's very difficult. How you got the spirit to kind of be where you are today, and the smile on your face and the brightness in your face. How you managed to do that?
Well,
we'll talk about your book.
Yes. Well, as such, as said, I considered hanging myself at 7 to 8, I think maybe, on the end of the banisters with a rope. It's the only way I knew how to die. Had I known about sleeping pills, I wouldn't be alive today. I know that. When I was 14. We were then living in Hampton Court Palace because my mother got a Grace and Favour apartment from the Queen. And I used to think of jumping. We had a rooftop apartment, so I thought I'd jump off there. And I had awful dental problems at the time as well, added to everything else. And I was always just terrified I didn't quite be dead by the bottom and would be, paralysed for the rest of my life or something, so I never did it. At 23 at Warwick University, not 23, I've been 21. I sat there with a bottle of Sonoril, which is a sleeping pill, and there were, I used to remember, I think it was 31 and a half tablets in the bottle. It was either 21 and a half or 31 and a half, I can't remember. And I was going to swallow the lot. And I was quite psychic, and a voice came through and it said to me, "There's not enough pills in that bottle. They'll find you and you'll have your stomach pumped and you won't like it." So that's why I didn't take them. I found out later the voice was lying. There was plenty of pills in that bottle. And when I was 23, I swore to myself, I remember almost the clothing I was wearing, looking in the mirror, and told myself I would never take my own life. And that if people didn't like the way I was, tough shit. Because my mother would never be seen out with me unless I had a wig on that she'd got for me from the National Health, which I hated. And I had to wear high-heeled shoes, which I also hated, and tights, which I also hated. I had to walk out looking like a sort of doll, and I hated it. And I decided from that moment onwards I would never wear another wig.
So you were 23?
I was 23.
I had a very similar time. When I was 23, I just thought that was my year as well. And I thought, I'm going to take control of my life now, and this is my choices. So what did you study? You mentioned Warwick University. Did you study there?
Yeah, I studied economics.
You studied economics at Warwick. And what an incredible life you had. So you had no hair at all at the time, did you? Did you wear wigs? Or?
In my childhood, there was just patches. I just had sort of bald patches. But the being completely bald didn't actually turn up till later. After, I think, in the late 20s, 30s, 40s, completely bald, yes. But it always grew. But, and because I wanted it healed, but yes, when I went to India. I think I was, I know it was 1980 anyway. I went to India, and I realised, I think it was then, it might have been earlier, but I think it was then, that my main problem in life wasn't the hair as I thought it had been. It was the effect my mother's reaction to the hair had on me. So I felt as if nobody wanted me and that I wasn't all right to be seen in public. I thought that it didn't matter what clothing I wore because I didn't look all right, so what did it matter what the rest of me looked like? And I started to change that by deciding that I would dress up the bit of me that wasn't hair. So I would dress up the rest of my body and look good. And then I started my healing path, in the beginning to heal myself, and then later to heal others. And the thing was that everything got better in my life. I went from being an introverted mouse that couldn't say anything to anybody or even answer questions a lot of the time, to somebody who became so extrovert that people that know me since I've been extrovert can't believe I could have ever been anything different.
We're so similar. That's what people say to me. Isn't that amazing? So I know you told me a really funny story when you came on the workshop about how you were working in the civil service and you were really bored. Could you tell me about that? Because I worked in a bank, and oh my goodness me, it drove me to
when I did the
you started doing the some training. Then you saw a magazine article.
Oh yes, because of various things that happened there because I was bored. Yes, we were in the department.
How old were you, first of all?
I must have been I got the job. I left university in 72 and I got the job in late 73. A year later, and was there for a year. So,
and tell me what happened.
I must have been 20-something. As such, we were working for a department called the OPB, which was something pensions board, but we hadn't actually got anything to do. So there were 30 of us, all on full pay with nothing to do. And so the great thing was how you could look busy. We did actually have the odd meeting about when this bill would actually come into fruition. And in actual fact, it never came into fruition because there was a change in government from Conservative to Labour, I think, who scrapped the whole thing. So, but there was a magazines you would read sort of to do with the work that we weren't doing, and we would read the magazines, and you got to the stage when you read the adverts as well. And I saw this advert for palmistry lessons, and I remember they were £2 each, I think, which in those days was considered a fair amount, but not too expensive. And there were 6 lessons to learn how to read palms. So I had 7 lessons because I wrote copious notes after each session, typed them up, and I went back for a 7th lesson to ask questions on the 6th lesson. And the man that taught me told me that he'd never had anyone take notes before. Well, thank God I did. And then I started to practice on people, and it turned out I was rather good at it.
So it all started when you were 24? So how long have you been reading for? How long have you been doing this for?
I think about 50 years now.
50 years?
Yeah.
50 years. And you've had such a... I mean, what this shows, this story, is the life you've had, and how you've completely hit rock bottom. An incredible experience, and we haven't even talked about your travels, and then to come to a place where you're healing. And we want to talk... Could you put your book up over there?
Oh, right, yes.
Tell me about this book.
Well, I was finding little exercises for people to do, and I was on the phone to somebody telling them some exercises they could do to help them change their life. And after I got off the phone, I thought I'd better write those down because they're quite good. So I wrote down the 5 headings, which I think are all in the first part of this book. And then I realised there was quite a lot of information and I could write a book. But I also knew that with my inability for self-control, that to actually write a book in the UK was going to be impossible, that I would go to my ashram in southern India, well, the ashram where I stayed, which was called Shantivanam, which got well known, not from the gurus that started it, they were French, but from Father Bede Griffiths, who took over from the French priests. And that's where it became full known. He was dead by that time, but the ashram was still going. So I went out there for three months and typed every single morning for 2 hours, because you type before it gets too hot, between 8 and 10. So I bought the cheapest, not the cheapest, I bought the most expensive but lightweight laptop I could lay my hands on, and took it to India and wrote my book there. So it took me about 2 or 3 weeks to write and another 2 or 3 weeks to sort of proofread.
But it's about love. I've read it, and it's about, because I think some people might think that the readings and that kind of world is dark, maybe speaking to dark spirits, or it's how do I describe this? That it's not of love. That's what I'm trying to say. Some people might think it's a dark industry, and it's not one of love. But you've written a book all about love, to know that you are loved, about your life. So
well, this is how I changed my own life around. I mean, I had been changing it for years, but I got to the stage when I had cleared up most of my past. I'd cleared up all the trauma I'd been through, but my life still wasn't working. And I used to say that I could prove in a court of law, if necessary, that I was hated in life, generally speaking. And then I started which is chapter 2 in the book, of learning I was loved. And I decided people are fallible. So, and one needs to feel unconditionally loved. So I thought of things like the paving stones are loving me. The trees are loving me. That rubbish over there is loving me. And I would go on special walks for about 20 minutes every day when I had nothing else to do except to think of everything I walked past was loving me. And I slowly changed it. And what started happening was nothing short of bloody miraculous. It was like I had one restaurant that was feeding me for free. I had another restaurant that charged me half price. And they even would give my friends 10% off if they arrived without me. I was getting black cab drivers that when I got out of it would say, oh, I was going to come down this road anyway, don't worry about it. So I was going free round London in cabs, or occasionally they would say, oh, just give us a £5 when it said 15 or something on the clock. So I was getting lots of free black cabs or cheap black cabs and free food. And there were other things that were happening as well, but those were the ones that stuck in my mind, because the 2 things I needed to do was eat and travel around.
Because you felt loved, and well, it's in the book, isn't it? You
Yes,
explain this
yes,
magic
yes,
in the book,
yes.
and how it works.
Well, I always remember coming out I went to a Burns night, which is sort of end of January, February, I can't remember, in the centre of London. And we got out at 2 o'clock in the morning. and there was a long queue for cabs in the foyer of the hotel. So I decided to go to the road and get my own cab. And as I stood there were not only no cabs going past, but no cars of any sort. I'd never seen London without any traffic in it. And after I'd waited for half an hour or something, I thought I'd better go and join the queue in the foyer for a cab. But then, of course, I remembered I needed to remember I was loved. And as I remembered I was loved, this cab came up. Now, I had already decided at that point that I wasn't prepared that £15 was the maximum I would like to pay to get home. When I got home, it was 22 or something on the meter. And the man looked at me and said, "Oh, give me 15.
Well, listen, there is so much in the book which people can buy. Is it available on Amazon, or do you have
It's available on Amazon,
there
yes.
We go. Well, I read it and I thought it was full of love, and I found it really, really fascinating and interesting. So what we're doing is we're talking about your incredible story. So people, I think you'd be a great guest on a podcast. All these new podcasts that have come along, but the things that you want to offer to the world, be it healing, the book, and the reading. Is that how you summarise it? Yeah. And I think the richness of your life experience really sells all of those, doesn't it? Just one thing, everyone will want to know this. What's the one story, if you could make just one for now, one story of how a reading changed someone's life?
I have to think about that, but I just wanted to tell you that the book has also been translated into Russian and into Spanish, but that was for Mexico only. And it's in Russian.
You did mention a story in the book actually about a young man. Is that the one that stands out the most? The man, the financial situation. He was going to be. You tell me. What's I want to know one of your stories that stands out. Although I could talk to you all day.
Yes. Well, there was somebody who had lost all his money he'd had a very bad burglary, and due to incompetence wasn't insured at the moment it happened. So, and he, because he lost it all, and he also had I think had a loan from the bank to buy what he had stolen, which wasn't insured, he therefore owed the bank rather a lot of money. And he was needing to sell things to pay the bank off. And I got him to do a visualization for everything that would be all right. Now, being a businessman, he wasn't very good at this. So we had a very basic visualization of a tree with fruit. And he needed to pick the fruit, but every time he tried to pick the fruit, the tree's branch would go up so he couldn't quite grab it. I think in this book I say it was a pear tree, but for sake of confidentiality I don't mention the actual fruit. And so I asked him to ask the tree when the fruit would be ripe. And we got a day 6 months ahead, and that the fruit would be ripe. And then I told him that he had to do this visualization between 1 and 3 times a day for at least 6 weeks. A week or so later, he rings me up and says he doesn't have enough time to do this visualization, which takes all of 2 minutes, So I said to him on the phone, "Tell me, do you go to work in your pyjamas, or do you go to bed fully dressed?" And I went on in this sort of... And he said, "Okay, I mean, if you've got enough time to get undressed, if you've got enough time to get dressed, you've got enough time to get washed, you've got enough time to do a 2-minute visualization." That was my... Anyway, he did it periodically. He didn't do it very good. Now, I wrote this date in my diary. 3 days before it was due, I get rung up by him hysterically because he had this arrangement to speak to the bank that day, and they had rung him up and changed the date to the date in the visualization. So I reminded him of this, and I said, "Well, of course, the fruit can't be ripe 3 days early." Then the day before, he rang me up again hysterically because one of his remaining possessions, which was his Rolls Royce or Bentley or whatever car he had left parked in a car park and come back to find it smashed up. And he was beside himself. And all I could think of saying was, for God's sake, pull yourself together. You owe the bank, I don't know, worth 500,000, 2 million, whatever. You're discussing it tomorrow. Just get your priorities right. Well, he goes to the bank interview really depressed because of his smashed up car. The banker used to him being one of those sort of showy off, egoistic, difficult men. But because he was so upset, he looked as a rather hangdog, and they felt sorry for him. And they wrote his debt off.
It's remarkable. An incredible story. And there's so much we could talk about. I'm going to finish it there, really. But to summarise, what you would recommend, really, is people get to know a little bit more about you by buying the book. And then arrange a consultation with you. How does it work? If people want to meet you.
Well, people ring me up. Some of them email me. I often like to speak to people on the phone if possible first, so I can sort of get the feel of them. But some people come in person. The people obviously that live in London. But I also work on Zoom, Skype, telephone. Actually, with healings online, I do like to be able to see the person, so I like it to be Zoom or Skype. But if they're having a reading, phone's fine.
And they can get in touch with you via the website.
Yes.
The details are on there. Thank you very much.